They thought it was a joke. A child walking into a courtroom with an old briefcase claiming he could defend his mother against the state. The prosecutor smirked. The spectators chuckled. Even the judge was ready to dismiss him. But when that 9-year-old boy opened his mouth and began citing legal statutes with perfect precision, the laughter died instantly. What happened next would change not just one family's life, but an entire community's understanding of justice. This is the true story of Marcus Thompson, the boy who proved that courage has no age limit. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. The courtroom fell silent as the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Every head turned to watch a small figure walk down the center aisle, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Marcus Thompson was only 9 years old, barely tall enough to see over the defendant's table, but he carried himself with a determination that seemed far beyond his years. His white shirt was freshly pressed, his clip-on tie slightly crooked, and in his small hands he clutched a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to his grandfather. Judge Patricia Thornton looked down from her bench with a mixture of surprise and irritation. She had been a judge for 23 years, presiding over family court cases in downtown Atlanta, and she had seen many unusual things. But never had she seen a child walk into her courtroom alone, approaching the defendant's table, where his mother, Claire Thompson, sat with tears streaming down her face. "Your Honor," the bailiff called out nervously, "there's a child." "I can see that, Richard," Judge Thornton interrupted, removing her reading glasses. "Young man, where are you supposed to be? Where are your parents?" Marcus stopped at the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. He looked up at the judge with steady brown eyes that held no fear, only purpose. "My mother is right there, Your Honor," he said clearly, pointing to Claire. "And I'm here to represent her." A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor, Martin Webb, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, covered his mouth to hide a smirk. Even the court reporter's shoulders shook with suppressed amusement. The public defender assigned to Claire's case, a tired-looking woman named Susan Martinez, simply stared in bewilderment. "Son," Judge Thornton said, her voice softening slightly, "this is not a place for children. You need to sit in the gallery with, I'm not leaving my mother," Marcus said firmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "And with all due respect, Your Honor, I have the right to be here." More laughter erupted. Someone in the back row actually applauded the boy's audacity before the bailiff silenced them with a stern look. Judge Thornton's expression hardened. She was about to order the child removed when Marcus did something unexpected. He opened the old briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers neatly organized and tabbed with colored markers. "Your Honor, according to Georgia Family Code Section 1971, a party in a family court proceeding may represent themselves pro se, which is Latin for on one's own behalf," Marcus said, reading from his papers but then looking up to meet the judge's eyes. "There is no minimum age requirement specified in the statute. While my mother has a court-appointed attorney, I am here as an interested party and family member to ensure her rights are protected." The laughter died instantly. Judge Thornton leaned forward, studying the boy with new interest. Susan Martinez's mouth fell open. Even Martin Webb stopped smirking and began flipping through his own files with sudden urgency. "Young man," the judge said slowly, "where did you learn about pro se representation?" "The public library, Your Honor," Marcus replied. "I've been studying there every day after school for the past 3 months. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, helped me find the law books." Claire Thompson let out a sob from her seat, covering her mouth with both hands. She had known her son was spending time at the library, but she had thought he was just doing homework, trying to escape the chaos of their tiny apartment where the walls were so thin you could hear every argument, every moment of despair. 3 months ago, Claire had made the worst mistake of her life. Working 2 jobs as a nurse's aide and a night custodian, exhausted beyond measure, she had left Marcus alone at home while she rushed to cover an emergency shift. She had done it before, always returning within a few hours, always making sure he had food and could reach her by phone. But that night, a neighbor had reported her to Child Protective Services. Now she faced charges of child neglect, charges that could take Marcus away from her forever, and brand her as an unfit mother. Judge Thornton studied the papers Marcus had laid out on the railing. They were meticulously organized, with tabs labeled relevant statutes, case precedents, character references, and economic hardship documentation. For a 9-year-old, the work was nothing short of extraordinary. "This is highly irregular," the judge said finally, looking to the prosecutor. "Mr. Webb, what is your position on this?" Martin Webb stood, adjusting his tie. He was known throughout the courthouse as a man who won cases, a prosecutor who never showed mercy to those who endangered children. His own childhood had been marked by neglect, and he carried that trauma into every case like a weapon. "Your Honor, this is clearly a stunt," Webb said dismissively. "While I commend the boy's initiative, a 9-year-old cannot possibly understand the complexities of family law. I move that he be removed from the courtroom and that we proceed with the scheduled hearing. Ms. Thompson already has representation." "She has representation that met her for 15 minutes yesterday," Marcus said loudly, his voice cracking slightly with emotion but not backing down. "Ms. Martinez has 43 other cases this month. I counted. My mother deserves better than that." Susan Martinez's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to protest but found she couldn't argue with the truth. The public defender's office was overwhelmed, understaffed, and she barely had time to breathe between cases, let alone prepare a solid defense. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, his small hands gripping the railing, "I'm not asking to be my mother's attorney. I know I can't do that. But I am asking to be heard as a family member, as the child at the center of this case. I'm the one they say was endangered. Don't I have a right to speak about my own life?" Judge Thornton removed her glasses again and rubbed her eyes. In 23 years, she had developed a sixth sense about people, about truth and deception, about genuine remorse and calculated manipulation. Looking at this 9-year-old boy, she saw something that troubled her deeply. She saw herself at that age, desperate and alone, fighting for a parent who the system had already decided to condemn. "Mr. Webb, Ms. Martinez, approach the bench," she ordered. As the attorneys huddled in whispered conversation with the judge, Marcus remained standing at the railing. He could feel every eye in the courtroom on him. Some looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with something that might have been respect. Behind him, he heard his mother crying softly, and he wanted to turn around and hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. But he couldn't show weakness now. He had learned from his library research that courtrooms respected strength, not tears. The whispered conference lasted nearly 5 minutes. Finally, the attorneys returned to their places, and Judge Thornton addressed the courtroom. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," she announced. "When we return, I will hear from young Mr. Thompson within appropriate limits. Bailiff, please clear the courtroom of all spectators except those directly involved in this case." As people filed out grumbling about the unusual proceeding, Marcus felt his legs begin to shake. The adrenaline that had carried him through those first moments was starting to fade, replaced by the crushing weight of what he was attempting. He was 9 years old, facing trained lawyers and a judge who held his mother's fate in her hands. What had he been thinking? He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. His mother had stood and reached across the railing to touch him. "Baby," she whispered, her voice broken. "You don't have to do this. Whatever happens, I'll—" "No, Mama," Marcus said, turning to look at her. His eyes were dry but fierce. "You've taken care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn." Claire Thompson saw in her son's face an echo of his father, a man who had died overseas when Marcus was only 2 years old. Jerome Thompson had been a paralegal in the Army, a man who believed deeply in justice and the power of the law to protect the vulnerable. Before he deployed for the last time, he had given his law books to Claire, making her promise that if anything happened to him, she would make sure their son understood that education and knowledge were the only true weapons against injustice. Marcus had found those books in a closet when he was 7, and he had been reading them ever since, sounding out words he didn't understand, asking Mrs. Henderson at the library to explain concepts that seemed impossibly complex. In the 3 months since his mother's arrest, he had become obsessed, reading everything he could about family law, child welfare, and the rights of the accused. The courtroom emptied until only the essential people remained. Judge Thornton, Martin Webb, Susan Martinez, Claire Thompson, Marcus, the bailiff, and the court reporter. The silence was heavy, expectant. "Court is now back in session," Judge Thornton said, her gavel falling with a sharp crack. "Mr. Thompson, you may address the court, but understand that I will stop you at any moment if this becomes inappropriate or if you are clearly out of your depth. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said. He opened his briefcase again, his hands steadier now. "I want to start by addressing the charge against my mother. The state claims she committed child neglect by leaving me unsupervised. But the statute defining neglect, OCGA, Section 19-15-1, specifies that neglect must involve a failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, or supervision that results in harm or substantial risk of harm to the child." He paused, making sure everyone was following. Martin Webb was now taking notes, his expression no longer dismissive but focused and wary. "Your Honor, I was never harmed. I was never at risk. My mother left me for 3 hours with food, a phone to call her, and clear instructions. I had done this before many times. I'm not a baby. I can heat up food, I know not to answer the door, and I know to call 911 if there's an emergency." "The law isn't about what actually happened," Webb interjected. "It's about risk assessment. A 9-year-old child left alone at night represents an inherent risk." Marcus turned to face the prosecutor directly, and for a moment, the courtroom saw not a child, but a defender, fierce and uncompromising. "Then let me talk about risk, Mr. Webb," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You know what the real risk is? The risk is that my mother loses her job because she can't work her shifts. The risk is that we lose our apartment because we can't pay rent. The risk is that I end up in foster care, separated from the only person who has ever loved me and cared for me." He pulled out another set of papers from his briefcase. "I have here documentation of my mother's work schedules, showing that the incident in question occurred during an emergency shift she was called in for. I have statements from her employers describing her as reliable and dedicated. I have my report card showing straight A's, proving that despite our circumstances I am thriving under my mother's care." Judge Thornton was now reading the documents Marcus slid across to the bailiff, who brought them to her bench. Her eyebrows rose as she scanned through the materials. The organization was impeccable, the argumentation clear and logical. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, "I've also researched similar cases in Georgia family courts over the past 10 years. In 15 cases involving working single mothers charged with leaving children unsupervised, 12 resulted in suspended sentences or mandated parenting classes when the mothers could demonstrate financial hardship and when the children showed no signs of physical or emotional harm." He pulled out yet another document, this one showing a table he had created by hand, listing case numbers, outcomes, and relevant details. Martin Webb's eyes widened as he saw the research. The boy had done more thorough case law research than some attorneys Webb had faced. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Thornton said slowly, "did you create this analysis yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Henderson showed me how to access the court record database at the library. It took me a long time, but I read every case I could find." The judge set down the papers and looked at Claire Thompson, who was openly weeping now, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then she looked at Marcus, standing brave and small at the railing, his too big briefcase at his feet, his crooked tie a reminder that he was still just a child trying to save his world from falling apart. "This court will take a 30-minute recess," Judge Thornton announced. "Mr. Webb, Ms. Martinez, my chambers now." As the attorneys filed out after the judge, Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe. He had done it. He had been heard. Whether it would be enough, he didn't know. But at least they were listening now. At least they weren't laughing anymore. The 30 minutes felt like hours. Marcus sat in the hallway outside the courtroom on a wooden bench, his feet dangling several inches above the floor. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand so tightly it almost hurt, but he didn't pull away. Every few minutes, she would open her mouth, as if to say something, then close it again, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Mama, don't cry," Marcus whispered. "We're going to win this." Claire shook her head slowly. "Baby, you don't understand how this works. Even if the judge is impressed, even if everything you said is right, the system doesn't always care about what's right. It cares about what's safe, what's standard, what protects them from liability." "Then I'll make them care," Marcus said with a certainty that broke his mother's heart. He was too young to carry this burden, too young to understand that sometimes courage and intelligence weren't enough against a system designed to grind people down. Inside Judge Thornton's chambers, a heated discussion was taking place. The office was lined with law books, the walls covered with certificates and photographs spanning a career devoted to family law. Behind her massive oak desk, Judge Thornton sat with her hands folded, listening as Martin Webb made his argument. "Your Honor, I understand the emotional appeal here," Webb said, pacing the small space between the desk and the door. "The boy is articulate, he's done his homework, and yes, it's impressive. But we can't let that cloud our judgment. Claire Thompson violated the law. She left a 9-year-old child alone at night. What if there had been a fire? What if someone had broken in? What if the child had gotten injured? What if? Susan Martinez interrupted, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Mr. Webb, you're prosecuting hypotheticals. The fact is, none of those things happened. The child is healthy, well-educated, and clearly well cared for. He's more prepared for life than half the teenagers I see coming through this court." Webb turned to her sharply. "Are you seriously arguing that we should ignore child neglect laws because the child turned out okay? That's not how the law works, Ms. Martinez, and you know it." "Gentlemen," Judge Thornton said quietly, but with enough authority to silence them both. "Sit down." They sat. The judge leaned back in her chair, studying them both with eyes that had seen too much suffering, too many broken families, too many children lost in a system that claimed to protect them, but often just shuffled them from one form of pain to another. "Let me tell you a story," she said, her voice taking on a distant quality. "When I was 8 years old, my mother worked 3 jobs. My father had left us and she was trying to keep a roof over our heads. Sometimes she had to leave me alone. Not often, but sometimes. One of our neighbors, a woman who meant well, reported her to the authorities." Webb and Martinez exchanged glances but remained silent. "I ended up in foster care for 6 months, Judge Thornton continued. 6 months in a home where the foster parents collected checks and provided the bare minimum. I went from being a straight-A student to failing everything. I stopped eating. I stopped talking. And my mother, who had done nothing wrong except be poor and black and alone, had to spend every penny she saved just to get me back." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the desk. "So when I see a case like this, Mr. Webb, I don't just see the letter of the law. I see the consequences of applying that law without wisdom, without context, without mercy." "Your Honor," Webb said carefully, "with all due respect, your personal experience, however tragic, cannot be the basis for a legal decision. We have laws for a reason." "I'm not suggesting we ignore the law," Judge Thornton replied. "I'm suggesting we apply it with the intelligence and discretion it was designed to allow. That boy out there has done something remarkable. He's shown us that he's not a victim of neglect. He's a child who has been taught to think, to research, to stand up for what's right. That doesn't happen in a home where neglect is occurring." She pulled out the documents Marcus had submitted and spread them across her desk. "Look at this research. Look at this organization. This didn't happen overnight. This child has been raised by someone who values education, who teaches responsibility, who instills confidence and capability. Is that the profile of a neglectful parent?" Martin Webb stood up abruptly, his jaw tight. "Your Honor, I need to say something, and it may be out of line, but I'm going to say it anyway." He took a deep breath. "I know you know my background. I know you know why I prosecute these cases so aggressively. I was one of those kids who actually was neglected. Truly neglected. I went hungry. I was beaten. I was left alone for days, not hours." His voice grew thick with emotion. "And nobody stopped it. Nobody intervened. Neighbors looked the other way. Teachers made excuses. And I suffered for years because the system that was supposed to protect me decided that keeping families together was more important than keeping children safe. He pointed toward the door, toward where Marcus and Claire sat waiting. So yes, maybe I err on the side of caution. Maybe I see danger where you see poverty. But I'd rather remove 10 children unnecessarily than miss the one who really needs saving. The room fell silent. Susan Martinez looked down at her hands, and Judge Thornton's expression softened. "Martin," the judge said gently, using his first name for perhaps the first time in all their years working together. "I understand your pain. I truly do. But you're making the same mistake the system made with you. You're treating every case like it's yours. You're seeing your father in every struggling parent, you're suffering in every child. But Marcus Thompson is not you. And Claire Thompson is not your father." Webb's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining out of him. He had been carrying his childhood into that courtroom for so many years that he had forgotten there were different kinds of stories, different kinds of struggles. Judge Thornton stood and walked to her window, looking down at the street below where people hurried about their lives, unaware of the life-changing decisions being made in the building above them. "Here's what I'm thinking," she said. "We bring them back in. We let the boy finish what he started. And then we make a decision based not just on the law, but on justice. Real justice, not just legal procedure." "Your Honor," Webb started to protest. "This is not a suggestion, Mr. Webb," Judge Thornton said firmly. "This is how we're proceeding. If you want to object for the record, you may do so, but that child earned the right to be heard, and I'm going to honor that." Susan Martinez allowed herself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, this would turn out differently than she had feared. When they returned to the courtroom, Marcus and Claire took their places. Marcus noticed immediately that something had changed. The prosecutor's face was different, still serious but less hostile, more human. The judge's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that might have been kindness. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Thornton said, "you may continue. Tell me about your life with your mother, and I want the truth, the whole truth. If there are problems, I need to know about them." Marcus nodded. This was the part he had been dreading, because telling the truth meant admitting things he had kept secret, things he had been ashamed of. But he had learned in his research that courts valued honesty above all else. "Your Honor, my life isn't perfect," he began, his voice quieter now but steady. "We live in a small apartment in a building that has rats sometimes. The heat doesn't always work in winter, and the air conditioning doesn't work at all in summer. My mother works 2 jobs, which means I don't see her as much as I'd like." He saw his mother tense beside her attorney, afraid of where this was going. "Sometimes we have to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries. Sometimes my mother cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep because she's so tired and so worried. Sometimes I go to school hungry because we ran out of food before her payday." Claire made a small sound of anguish, and Susan Martinez put a comforting hand on her arm. "But," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, "my mother has never hit me. She's never yelled at me. She's never made me feel like I was a burden. Every single day, no matter how tired she is, she asks me about my homework. She takes me to the library on her days off. She makes me read to her while she's cooking dinner. She taught me that being poor doesn't mean being stupid, and being tired doesn't mean giving up." He reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a worn notebook. "This is my journal. My mother bought it for me 2 years ago and told me to write down one good thing every day. One thing that made me happy or taught me something. I've never missed a day." He opened it to a random page and read, "Today Mama taught me how to make her special rice and beans even though she was so tired from work she could barely stand. She said someday I'll need to know how to take care of myself. She said cooking with love makes even simple food taste special." He flipped to another page. "Today Mama and I walked to the park even though it was raining, because she said rainy days are when the world looks cleanest. We didn't have an umbrella, but we laughed the whole way home. Mama said being wet is just water, but being happy is everything." Marcus looked up at the judge, and now there were tears in his eyes. But he didn't wipe them away. Your Honor, I know we're poor. I know my mother had to leave me alone sometimes, but I also know that she loves me more than anything in the world, and that she's teaching me to be a good person, not just a safe person. Judge Thornton blinked rapidly, and even Martin Webb seemed to be having trouble maintaining his composure. The night that the neighbor called the police, Marcus continued, my mother got a call that one of the patients at the nursing home where she works was dying. This patient, Mrs. Abernathy, had no family. My mother had taken care of her for 3 years. When Mrs. Abernathy asked for my mother specifically because she didn't want to die alone, my mother made a choice. She could stay home with me, or she could go hold a dying woman's hand so that woman wouldn't be scared in her last moments. He looked directly at Martin Webb now. My mother chose kindness. She chose to be there for someone who had nobody else. She made sure I was safe, she made sure I had her phone number, she made sure I knew what to do in an emergency. And then she went and sat with Mrs. Abernathy until she died peacefully, holding my mother's hand. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, caught up in the story. So yes, technically my mother broke the law, Marcus said. But she didn't break her promise to me, and she didn't break her promise to Mrs. Abernathy. She kept both of us safe, both of us loved. If that's a crime, then I think the law is wrong. Marcus closed his briefcase with a quiet click. I'm done, Your Honor. Whatever you decide, I just wanted you to know the truth. My mother is the best person I know, and I'm proud to be her son. He sat down, suddenly exhausted, feeling all 9 years of his age. His mother reached across the space between them and gripped his hand, her tears falling freely now, splashing onto the wooden table. Judge Thornton took a long moment before speaking. When she did, her voice was rough with emotion. Mr. Webb, does the state wish to present any rebuttal? Martin Webb stood slowly. Every eye in the courtroom turned to him, waiting to see if he would press forward with the prosecution, or if he would show mercy. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking at Marcus, seeing not a case file, but a child who loved his mother fiercely, who had taught himself law to defend her, who understood justice better at 9 years old than many adults ever would. Your Honor, Webb said finally, I would like to request a recess to reconsider the state's position in this case. The recess lasted an hour. Marcus and his mother were escorted to a small conference room down the hall, where they sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs under flickering fluorescent lights. Claire held her son close, stroking his hair the way she had when he was a baby, unable to find words adequate for what he had done. You should have told me, she whispered finally. All those weeks at the library, I thought you were just trying to avoid coming home to our mess of an apartment. I didn't know you were doing this. I couldn't tell you, Marcus said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. You would have tried to stop me. You would have said I was too young, that it wasn't my responsibility. Because it isn't your responsibility, Claire said, pulling back to look at him. I'm the parent. I'm supposed to protect you, not the other way around. Marcus met her eyes with an intensity that reminded her so much of Jerome it physically hurt. Daddy used to say that family protects family. That's what you taught me, he said. You've been protecting me my whole life, Mama. It's my turn now. Before Claire could respond, the door opened and Susan Martinez stepped in. The public defender's usual exhausted expression had been replaced with something approaching hope. I don't know what you did in there, she said to Marcus, but I've been practicing law for 12 years and I've never seen Martin Webb request time to reconsider. Never. He usually goes for the throat and doesn't let go until the case is closed. What do you think it means? Claire asked, hardly daring to hope. Susan sat down across from them, leaning forward with her elbows on the table. I think it means your son reached him in a way that legal arguments never could. Martin has a reputation as a hard man, but he's not a cruel one. He genuinely believes he's protecting children. But maybe, just maybe, Marcus helped him see that protecting children isn't always about removing them from their homes. She pulled out a notepad and pen. Now, while we wait, I need to prepare you for all possible outcomes. Best case scenario, Webb drops the charges entirely. More likely, he'll offer a plea deal. Mandatory parenting classes, supervised visits for a period of time, regular home checks by social services. And worst case? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Worst case, the judge finds you guilty and you lose custody, Susan said bluntly. Marcus goes into foster care while you complete a longer rehabilitation program. But after what I just witnessed, I'd say that outcome is unlikely. Marcus had been quiet, listening. Now he spoke up. Ms. Martinez, if they offer a plea deal, should my mother take it? The attorney looked at him with newfound respect. That depends on the terms. A plea deal means admitting guilt, which goes on her record. It could affect future employment, housing applications, everything. But it also means certainty. A trial is always a gamble. My mother didn't do anything wrong, Marcus said firmly. She shouldn't have to admit that she did. Marcus, baby, Claire said gently. Sometimes in life we have to compromise. Sometimes we have to accept things that aren't fair so we can move forward. Is that what Daddy would have done? Marcus asked. The question hung in the air. Claire closed her eyes, remembering Jerome, remembering his unwavering belief in standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it cost something. He had died for those beliefs, in a sense, volunteering for dangerous assignments because he believed in protecting others, in fighting for justice. No, she admitted quietly. Your daddy would have fought. Then that's what we're going to do, Marcus said. We're going to fight. Down the hall in another conference room, Martin Webb sat alone with his own thoughts. On the table in front of him lay the file on Claire Thompson, thin compared to most of his cases. Single mother, 2 jobs, no criminal record, no history with Child Protective Services. The incident report from the neighbor, a Mrs. Patricia Henderson, was brief. She had heard the child moving around the apartment alone after 10 p.m. and, concerned for his safety, had called the police. Webb pulled out his phone and did something he rarely did during a case. He called the reporting party directly. Mrs. Henderson, this is Martin Webb from the district attorney's office. I'm calling about the Thompson case. Yes, ma'am, I know it's unusual. I just have a few questions if you don't mind. Patricia Henderson, the librarian who had been helping Marcus with his research, answered cautiously. I want you to know I felt terrible about that call ever since I made it. I thought I was doing the right thing. Can you tell me what prompted you to call? Webb asked. I heard the boy walking around upstairs. It was late, maybe 10:30, and I knew his mother wasn't home because I'd seen her leave earlier in her work uniform. I worried about him being alone. I have grandchildren his age, and I thought he needed protection. She paused. But Mr. Webb, I need to tell you something. That boy has been coming to the library where I work for years. He's the most responsible, intelligent child I've ever met. And his mother, the few times I've spoken with her, is devoted to him. I made a mistake. Webb felt something shift in his chest. What kind of mistake? I judged their situation by my standards, Mrs. Henderson said. I have a husband, a pension, a comfortable home. I forgot what it was like when I was young and struggling. I forgot that poor doesn't mean bad and different doesn't mean wrong. I took a child who was perfectly safe and turned his world upside down because I assumed I knew better. After the call ended, Webb sat for a long time staring at the wall. He thought about his own childhood, about the real neglect he had suffered, about the hunger and fear and pain. Then he thought about Marcus, standing in that courtroom with his crooked tie and his grandfather's briefcase, fighting not because he was scared or hurt, but because he loved his mother and knew she deserved better. They weren't the same. The cases weren't the same. And if he couldn't see that difference, then he had become the very thing he had always fought against, someone who let their own pain blind them to the truth. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed. Martin Webb stood at the prosecutor's table with a posture that was somehow both defeated and relieved, as if he had lost a battle, but won something more important in the process. Your Honor, he began, the state would like to make a motion. Judge Thornton nodded. Proceed, Mr. Webb. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, including the testimony and documentation provided by the defendant's son, and after speaking with the reporting party who initiated this case, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Claire Thompson. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Claire's hand flew to her mouth and Susan Martinez's eyes widened in shock. Marcus sat very still, not quite believing what he was hearing. However, Webb continued, raising his hand, the state does have concerns about the systemic issues this case has revealed. Ms. Thompson is not a criminal. She's a victim of an economic system that forces parents to make impossible choices. With the court's permission, I would like to propose an alternative resolution. Judge Thornton leaned forward. I'm listening. The state will dismiss all charges on the condition that Ms. Thompson participates in a voluntary support program, Webb said. Not parenting classes, she clearly doesn't need those, but connection to community resources, help finding child care assistance, career counseling that might help her find a single job with better pay and benefits instead of working herself to death at 2 jobs. Real support, not punishment. He turned to look at Claire directly. Ms. Thompson, you're not a failure as a mother. You're a success, despite a system that has failed you. This court should be helping you, not prosecuting you. Claire was crying openly now, her whole body shaking with sobs of relief. Susan Martinez put an arm around her shoulders, her own eyes suspiciously bright. Judge Thornton picked up her gavel, but before she struck it, she addressed the courtroom. Mr. Webb, that is perhaps the most appropriate use of prosecutorial discretion I have witnessed in my 23 years on this bench. Ms. Thompson, this court finds that you have done nothing that warrants criminal prosecution. Your son has demonstrated today that you have raised him with love, intelligence, and values that many children from far more privileged homes never receive. She looked at Marcus, and her stern, judicial expression softened into something approaching admiration. Young man, you did something extraordinary today. You didn't just defend your mother. You educated this court about the difference between legal technicalities and true justice. I hope you'll consider becoming a lawyer when you grow up, because the legal profession needs more people who understand that law should serve justice, not replace it. Marcus felt his eyes burning with tears, but he blinked them back. Thank you, Your Honor. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. Case dismissed. This court is adjourned. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Claire jumped up and rushed to the railing where Marcus stood. She swept him into her arms, lifting him despite his protests that he was too old to be picked up, holding him tight while she cried and laughed at the same time. You did it, she kept saying. Baby, you did it. But Marcus's attention had been caught by something else. Martin Webb had approached the defendant's table, and he was standing there awkwardly, clearly wanting to say something. Claire noticed him and set Marcus down, wiping her eyes. Mr. Webb, Ms. Thompson, I owe you an apology, Webb said, extending his hand. I let my own history cloud my judgment. Your son helped me see that. Claire shook his hand, surprised by the gesture. We all have our histories, Mr. Webb. I can't fault you for trying to protect children. Webb then turned to Marcus and did something that surprised everyone. He crouched down to the boy's eye level and extended his hand. Mr. Thompson, you're going to make an excellent lawyer someday. You have something that can't be taught in law school. You have heart and you have courage. Don't ever lose that. Marcus shook his hand solemnly. Thank you, sir. And thank you for listening. As Webb walked away, Susan Martinez gathered her files with a smile. I've got to get to another courtroom, but Claire, I'll be in touch about those resources the state mentioned. And Marcus? She ruffled his hair affectionately. Keep reading those law books. I mean it when I say the profession needs people like you. Soon Marcus and Claire were alone in the courtroom except for the bailiff, who was discreetly giving them space. Mother and son sat together on the wooden bench, exhausted but victorious, the weight of months of fear finally lifting from their shoulders. What do we do now? Marcus asked. Claire pulled him close. Now we go home. We have dinner, we celebrate. And tomorrow, we figure out how to make things better. Maybe those resources Mr. Webb mentioned can help. Maybe we can find a way that I don't have to work 2 jobs. Maybe we can find a way to spend more time together. I'd like that, Marcus said quietly. Then, after a pause, Mama, can I tell you something? Anything, baby. I was really scared, he admitted. The whole time I was terrified that I'd mess up, that I'd make things worse, that they'd take you away because of what I said. Claire turned to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. Marcus Jerome Thompson, you listen to me. What you did today was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Brave doesn't mean not being scared. Brave means being scared and doing it anyway. Your daddy would be so proud of you. I am so proud of you. They sat there for a while longer, neither one wanting to break the moment. Outside the courtroom windows, the Atlanta sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, and for the first time in months they felt free to notice beautiful things again. Finally they gathered their belongings, Marcus's briefcase, Claire's worn purse, and walked out of the courtroom together. As they passed through the courthouse halls, a few people who had been in the gallery earlier stopped to congratulate them, to tell Marcus how impressed they were, to wish them well. When they stepped out into the evening air, Marcus took a deep breath. Mama, there's something I need to tell you. What is it? Mrs. Henderson, the librarian who called the police? She's been helping me with my research. She felt really bad about what happened. She wants to apologize to you. Claire was quiet for a moment. She had been angry at the neighbor who reported her, had felt betrayed and judged. But now, after everything that had happened, that anger seemed small and pointless. You know what? She said. I think I'd like to thank her. Thank her? Marcus looked confused. If she hadn't made that call, we might have kept going the way we were going, struggling and barely surviving, never asking for help because I was too proud or too scared. But because she called, because you fought so hard, we found out something important. What's that? That we're not alone, Claire said. That there are people who care, people who will listen, people who want to help if we give them the chance. That prosecutor, that judge, even Mrs. Henderson. They all ended up on our side because they saw the truth. Sometimes the hard way is the only way to get to the right place. As they walked toward the bus stop, Claire's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, and then her face broke into a smile. That was the nursing home, she said after hanging up. They heard about what happened. They want to promote me to day shift supervisor. Better pay, better hours, and I'd be working when you're at school. Marcus, I wouldn't have to work 2 jobs anymore. Marcus felt something expand in his chest, a feeling so big it almost hurt. Hope. Pure, unbridled hope for a future that might actually be better than their past. See? He said, grinning up at his mother. I told you we were going to win. Claire laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Marcus had heard in months. They boarded the bus together, finding seats near the back, and as the city rolled past their windows, they began to talk about possibilities. About Claire going back to school to become a registered nurse. About Marcus continuing his studies. About maybe someday moving to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. But what neither of them knew was that their story was far from over. In fact, the most surprising part was yet to come. 3 weeks after the court case, Marcus returned to school as something of a local celebrity. The story had been covered by a local news station, and while Claire had tried to shield him from too much attention, word had spread through his elementary school. Teachers looked at him differently now, with a mixture of pride and something else, perhaps a hint of guilt that they had never noticed what this child was capable of. But Marcus didn't want to be treated differently. He wanted things to go back to normal, to being just another 4th grader who liked reading and hated gym class. What he didn't expect was the knock on their apartment door on a Saturday morning, exactly 23 days after the case was dismissed. Claire opened the door to find a well-dressed older woman standing in the hallway, holding a leather portfolio and wearing a gentle smile. She was African American, probably in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Thompson? My name is Eleanor Richardson. I wonder if I might have a moment of your time. Claire's instincts immediately went on alert. She had learned to be wary of unexpected visitors, especially official-looking ones. "What is this about?" "It's about your son," Eleanor said, "and an opportunity I think you'll want to hear about." "May I come in?" Marcus appeared behind his mother, curious. Something about the woman seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Claire reluctantly stepped aside, apologizing for the state of their small apartment. Eleanor waved off the apology and settled into their worn couch with the ease of someone comfortable anywhere. "I was in the courtroom that day," Eleanor began, looking directly at Marcus. "I come to family court once a month as part of my volunteer work. I like to observe proceedings to see how the system is working, where it might be improved. When I saw you walk in with that briefcase, I'll admit I was skeptical. But by the time you finished speaking, I was amazed." "Thank you," Marcus said politely, though he wasn't sure where this was going. Eleanor opened her portfolio and pulled out several documents. "I'm the director of the Richardson Foundation, a non-profit organization that provides scholarships and mentorship to exceptional students from underserved communities. We focus particularly on students who show not just academic excellence, but character, determination, and a commitment to justice." Claire's breath caught. "A scholarship?" "Not exactly," Eleanor said. "What I'm proposing is more comprehensive than that. The Richardson Foundation would like to offer Marcus a full sponsorship through his education, elementary school, middle school, high school, and if he chooses, college and beyond. This includes tuition to any school he wishes to attend, tutoring support, enrichment programs, and a monthly stipend to help ease your family's financial burden." The words seemed to echo in the small apartment. Marcus and Claire looked at each other, both afraid to believe what they were hearing. "There must be some mistake," Claire said slowly. "Things like this don't happen to people like us." Eleanor's expression softened. "Ms. Thompson, I understand your skepticism, but let me tell you why I'm here. 40 years ago, I was a single mother working 3 jobs to keep my son fed and housed. He was brilliant, just like Marcus, but I couldn't afford to give him the opportunities his intelligence deserved. One day, a stranger showed up at my door with an offer similar to what I'm making you now. That stranger changed our lives." She pulled out a photograph from her portfolio and handed it to Marcus. It showed a young man in a graduation gown standing next to a younger version of Eleanor, both beaming with pride. "That's my son David at his law school graduation from Harvard. Today, he's a federal judge. He presides over cases in this very courthouse, though he was traveling during your hearing. When he heard about what happened from his colleagues, he immediately told me I needed to find you." Marcus stared at the photograph, his mind racing. "Your son is a judge?" "Judge David Richardson," Eleanor confirmed, "and he would very much like to meet you, Marcus. He sees in you the same spark that drove him to succeed despite our circumstances. He wants to help ensure that you have every opportunity he had." Claire was crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of disbelief, of overwhelming gratitude, of fear that this might be too good to be true. Why us? Why Marcus? There must be hundreds of deserving children. "Thousands," Eleanor agreed, "and we help as many as we can. But Marcus did something extraordinary. He didn't just study the law, he used it to protect someone he loved. He stood up in a system designed to intimidate, and he demanded justice. That's not something you can teach, Ms. Thompson. That's character. That's exactly the kind of person we want to invest in." She pulled out more documents, outlining the terms of the sponsorship. It was legitimate, vetted by lawyers, with no hidden clauses or expectations beyond Marcus continuing his education and maintaining good character. "I need you to understand," Eleanor continued, "this isn't charity. This is an investment in a young person who has already proven he has what it takes to make a real difference in the world. We're not asking anything from you except that you let us help." Marcus had been quiet, processing everything. Now he spoke up, his voice small. "What if I'm not as smart as everyone thinks? What if I disappoint you?" Eleanor reached out and took his hand. "Marcus, intelligence isn't just about grades or test scores. It's about how you think, how you solve problems, how you care about others. You've already demonstrated all of that. Whatever path you choose, whatever you become, you won't disappoint us. We believe in you." Over the next hour, Eleanor explained the details. Marcus could stay in his current school if he wished, or transfer to one of several excellent private schools the foundation partnered with. He would receive tutoring in any subjects he struggled with, enrichment programs in areas he excelled at, and mentorship from professionals in fields he might be interested in pursuing. "There's also a personal development component," Eleanor said. "Summer programs, cultural experiences, travel opportunities when you're older. We want to expand your world, show you possibilities you might never have imagined." Claire kept looking for the catch, for the hidden price, but there wasn't one. The Richardson Foundation was funded by David Richardson's successful career and the success of previous scholarship recipients who gave back once they were able. It was a cycle of opportunity, each generation lifting up the next. "Can we think about it?" Claire asked finally. "Of course," Eleanor said, standing. "This is a big decision. Take your time. Here's my card with all my contact information. Call me when you're ready, or if you have any questions." After Eleanor left, Marcus and Claire sat in silence for a long time. The scholarship papers lay on their coffee table like a promise too big to fully comprehend. "What do you think, baby?" Claire asked finally. Marcus picked up the photograph of David Richardson at his graduation. The young man in the picture looked happy, proud, full of hope for his future. Marcus wanted that. He wanted it so badly it scared him. "I think," he said slowly, "that this is what Daddy would have wanted for me. A chance to be everything I can be." Claire pulled him into a hug. "Then we'll call her tomorrow and say yes." But that night, as Marcus lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling back to something Eleanor had said, something that didn't quite add up. She had mentioned that Judge Richardson heard about the case from colleagues in the courthouse, but the case had been dismissed, closed, no longer part of the court record. How would other judges have heard about it in such detail? The next morning, Marcus asked his mother if they could visit the courthouse. Claire was confused. They never needed to go back there, but she saw the determination in her son's eyes and agreed. When they arrived, Marcus asked the information desk for Judge David Richardson's chambers. The clerk looked surprised but made a call, and within minutes they were being escorted through the secure areas of the courthouse to a suite of offices on the 4th floor. Judge Richardson was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with his mother's kind eyes and a commanding presence that came from years on the bench. When Marcus and Claire were shown into his office, he stood immediately, coming around his desk to greet them. "Marcus Thompson," he said, shaking the boy's hand. "I've been hoping you'd come see me." "You were expecting us?" Marcus asked. The judge smiled. "I've learned to expect extraordinary things from extraordinary people. Please, sit down." Once they were settled, Marcus got straight to the point. "How did you really hear about my case? It was dismissed. It shouldn't be something other judges would know about in detail." Judge Richardson's smile widened. "You're as sharp as I heard. You're right. I didn't hear about it from colleagues. I was there." "What?" Claire said. "But your mother said you were traveling." "I was returning from travel," the judge corrected. "I arrived at the courthouse just as your hearing was starting. I stood in the back of the gallery. I heard every word Marcus said. I watched him defend you with courage and intelligence that most trained attorneys never display. And when it was over, I knew I had to do something." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Marcus, do you know why I became a judge?" Marcus shook his head. "Because when I was young, I saw too many people who looked like us, who came from neighborhoods like ours, get treated as if they didn't matter by a legal system that was supposed to protect everyone equally. I vowed that if I ever had the power to change that, I would. But watching you in that courtroom, I realized something." "What?" Marcus asked. "That the next generation of changemakers is already here. You didn't wait for someone to save your mother. You didn't accept that the system knew better than you did. You studied, you prepared, and you fought. That's what this country needs. People who understand that justice isn't something handed down from above. It's something we have to stand up and demand." Judge Richardson stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city. My mother's foundation has helped hundreds of students over the years. We've produced doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs, artists, and yes, lawyers and judges. But I've never been more certain about a candidate than I am about you, Marcus. Not because of what you'll become, but because of who you already are. He turned back to face them. I also want you to know that I've spoken with several colleagues, and we've arranged something else. Your mother's case may be dismissed, but the issues it raised, about poverty, about childcare, about the impossible choices working parents face, those issues are real. We're working with community organizations to create a support network for families in similar situations. Your case is going to help change things for other people, Marcus. That's the real victory. Claire was overwhelmed. Judge Richardson, I don't know what to say. This is all so much. Say yes. The judge replied simply. Say yes to the scholarship. Say yes to the opportunity. Say yes to letting us invest in your son's future. And in return, all I ask is that someday, when Marcus is successful and established, he remembers where he came from, that he helps the next child who needs someone to believe in them. Marcus looked at his mother, then back at the judge. I'll do more than remember, he said. I'll make sure that what you're doing for me, I do for someone else. I promise. Judge Richardson extended his hand. Then we have a deal, counselor. As they left the courthouse that day, Marcus felt different. The weight he had been carrying for months, the fear, the responsibility, the desperation, had transformed into something else. Purpose, direction, hope. Mama, he said as they walked down the courthouse steps into the bright morning sun. I think I know what I want to be when I grow up. Claire smiled down at him. Let me guess. A lawyer? A lawyer, Marcus confirmed. But not just any lawyer. I want to help people who can't help themselves. I want to be the person who stands up when everyone else sits down. Just like Daddy would have done. Claire stopped walking and knelt down to look her son in the eye. Marcus, your daddy would be so incredibly proud of you. Not because you're going to be a lawyer, but because you're going to be a good man. That's all he ever wanted for you. They walked home together, talking about the future for the first time in years without fear clouding every possibility. The scholarship would start in the fall. Marcus would attend the academy, one of the best private schools in Atlanta, while continuing to live at home with his mother. Claire would start her new position as day shift supervisor, finally working reasonable hours for decent pay. But the most important change wasn't written in any contract or scholarship agreement. It was the change in how they saw themselves. They were no longer just surviving. They were building something better. Together. 5 years later, Marcus Thompson stood in the hallway of the same courthouse. But everything was different. He was 14 now, taller, his voice deeper, but his eyes still held that same fierce determination. He wore a suit that actually fit, courtesy of the Richardson Foundation, and he carried a new briefcase, a gift from Judge Richardson on his 13th birthday. But he wasn't there for himself this time. The courtroom door opened, and a small girl emerged with her grandmother, both of them crying. Marcus recognized the expression on their faces. He had worn it himself once, that mixture of fear and fragile hope. He approached them gently. Mrs. Garcia, I'm Marcus Thompson. Judge Richardson asked me to meet with you. The grandmother looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. You're the boy, the one who defended his mother. Yes, ma'am. And I'd like to help you defend your granddaughter, if you'll let me. Over the past 5 years, Marcus had not only excelled at the academy, but had become involved with the very program Judge Richardson had mentioned, a community support network for families facing charges related to poverty and childcare. He wasn't old enough to practice law, of course, but he had become something else. A bridge between scared families and a legal system they didn't understand. He helped them gather documents, explained court procedures in plain language, connected them with resources, and sat beside them in hearings just as he had sat beside his mother. Judge Richardson called him the court's conscience, a reminder that behind every case file was a real person with a real story. The Garcia case was similar to what his mother had faced. A single grandmother raising her granddaughter alone after the child's parents had died in a car accident. She had left the 10-year-old home alone for a few hours to work an extra shift, trying to save money for the girl's quinceañera. A well-meaning neighbor had called Child Protective Services. Marcus spent the afternoon with them, reviewing their documents, helping Mrs. Garcia understand what would happen in court the next week. He shared his own story, showing the grandmother that there was hope, that the system could work if you knew how to navigate it. "But I don't have a smart grandson like you to speak for me," Mrs. Garcia said sadly. "You have something better," Marcus replied. "You have me, and you have a network of people who've learned from what happened to my family. You're not alone anymore." That evening, Marcus returned home to their new apartment, still modest but in a safer neighborhood with reliable heat and no rats. His mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming along to the radio. She had completed her nursing degree the year before, and now worked as an RN at the same hospital where she had once been a nurse's aide. The transformation in their lives sometimes still took Marcus's breath away. "How'd it go with the Garcia family?" Claire asked as Marcus set his briefcase down. "She's scared, but she's strong. She reminds me of you." Claire smiled. "You remind me of your father more every day. He would have been so proud to see what you've become." Marcus helped her set the table, a routine they cherished. No matter how busy their lives got, they always made time for dinner together. It was a promise they had made to each other after the court case, that success would never be more important than family. "Mom, I've been thinking about something," Marcus said as they sat down to eat. "Should I be worried?" Claire teased. "I want to start a program at school, a legal literacy program where students learn about their rights, about how the court system works, about how to advocate for themselves and their families. A lot of my classmates come from backgrounds like ours. They should know they have power." Claire reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Have you talked to Judge Richardson about it?" "He's the one who suggested it," Marcus admitted. "He said he'd help me get it approved by the school board, but I wanted to make sure you were okay with it. I know it means I'll be busier, less time at home." "Marcus, baby, I didn't raise you to play it safe. I raised you to make a difference. If this is how you want to do that, then I'm behind you 100%. The next week, Marcus sat in the gallery as Mrs. Garcia's case was heard. The prosecutor was different from Martin Webb, younger and less experienced, but still determined to enforce the law. However, this time there was a difference. Susan Martinez, who had been Claire's public defender, was now in private practice and had taken the case pro bono. She argued passionately about the economic realities facing single guardians, about the lack of affordable childcare, about the difference between neglect and poverty. She cited precedents, including the Thompson case, though it had been dismissed and technically wasn't precedent at all. But she cited it anyway, as an example of judicial wisdom and mercy. The prosecutor pushed back, but his heart wasn't in it. The network Judge Richardson had helped create had already connected Mrs. Garcia with resources, child care assistance, flexible work arrangements, community support. The state's concerns had been addressed before the hearing even began. Judge Thornton, still presiding over family court, listened to both sides. When it was time for her ruling, she looked directly at Marcus sitting in the gallery and gave him the slightest nod. "This court finds that while the defendant technically violated child care supervision laws, the violation was the result of economic necessity rather than negligent intent. Furthermore, the defendant has already taken steps to ensure the situation will not reoccur. Case dismissed, with the condition that the defendant continues to participate in the community support program." Mrs. Garcia collapsed in tears of relief, and her granddaughter hugged her tightly. Marcus felt that familiar feeling in his chest, that expansion of hope and possibility. After the hearing, Judge Thornton called Marcus over. "Mr. Thompson, I hear you're starting a legal literacy program at your school." "Yes, Your Honor. We're calling it the Justice League. We're going to teach students about their rights and how to navigate the legal system." "The Justice League," Judge Thornton repeated with a smile. "I like it. You know, when I first saw you walk into my courtroom 5 years ago, I thought you were going to be a problem. I was wrong. You turned out to be the solution. I had good teachers, Marcus said. You, Judge Richardson, Mr. Webb, even the hard parts taught me something. Speaking of Mr. Webb, the judge said, he'd like to talk to you if you have a moment. He's in conference room 3. Marcus found Martin Webb in the small conference room, looking older now, with more gray in his hair. But when he saw Marcus, his face lit up with genuine warmth. Marcus, look at you. All grown up. Mr. Webb, it's good to see you. They shook hands, and Webb gestured for Marcus to sit. I wanted to tell you something I should have told you years ago. Your case changed how I do my job. I'm still a prosecutor, still committed to protecting children. But now I take time to understand the full story before I make decisions. I ask more questions. I look for solutions instead of just punishments. That means a lot to hear, Marcus said. I also wanted to tell you that I'm leading a task force on reforming child care laws in Georgia. We're trying to create better support systems so families don't have to choose between earning a living and taking care of their children. I'd like you to be part of it if you're interested. We need young voices, people who understand these issues personally. Marcus felt that sense of purpose growing even stronger. I'd be honored. That evening there was a celebration dinner at Judge Richardson's home. Eleanor Richardson had insisted on it when she heard about Marcus's legal literacy program. The table was filled with people whose lives had intersected with Marcus's story: Judge Richardson, his mother Eleanor, Susan Martinez, even Patricia Henderson, the librarian who had first reported Claire and then helped Marcus with his research. Mrs. Henderson had apologized to Claire years ago, and they had become friends. She now volunteered with the Community Support Network, using her experience as a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions about struggling families. As dessert was being served, Judge Richardson stood and tapped his glass for attention. I'd like to make a toast. 5 years ago, a 9-year-old boy walked into a courtroom with nothing but courage and a borrowed briefcase. He didn't just defend his mother. He challenged all of us to be better, to see more clearly, to remember why we went into public service in the first place. He looked at Marcus with obvious affection. Marcus, you've exceeded every hope I had for you. Your grades are excellent, your character is impeccable, and more importantly, you're using everything you've learned to help others. That's the true measure of success. Here's what most people don't know, the judge continued. The Richardson Foundation scholarship that Marcus received, it came with an expectation that recipients would give back once they were able. Most do so after college, after they're established in their careers. Marcus started giving back at age 10. Everyone turned to look at Marcus, who felt his face grow warm. In the past 5 years, Marcus has personally helped 43 families navigate the family court system. He's connected them with resources, explained their rights, sat with them during hearings, and advocated for changes to the system. 43 families that might have been torn apart are still together because a teenage boy decided that his experience should benefit others. The room erupted in applause. Claire was crying again, happy tears that seemed to come easier these days. She was so proud she thought her heart might burst. So, here's my toast, Judge Richardson said, raising his glass. To Marcus Thompson, who reminds us that you're never too young to make a difference, never too small to stand up for what's right, and never too inexperienced to teach the experts a thing or two about justice. May your example inspire many others to follow in your footsteps. To Marcus, everyone chorused. Later that night, as Marcus and his mother drove home through the quiet Atlanta streets, Claire reflected on how much had changed. They had gone from barely surviving to truly thriving. From feeling powerless to knowing they had agency. From being isolated to being part of a community. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Marcus said from the passenger seat. "Anything. Do you ever regret it? The night you left me alone, the court case, all of it? If you could go back and do it differently, would you?" Claire was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "You know what? I regret that we were ever in a position where I had to make that choice. I regret that we lived in a system that forced working parents to choose between their jobs and their children. I regret that Mrs. Abernathy died without family around her, and that I couldn't be with you and with her at the same time. She paused at a red light and turned to look at her son. But I don't regret what happened after. I don't regret that you fought for us. I don't regret that our struggle ended up helping other families. And I certainly don't regret who you've become because of it. You turned our hardest moment into something beautiful, Marcus. That's a gift not everyone has. I learned it from you, Marcus said. You never gave up, even when things were impossibly hard. You taught me that fighting for what matters is always worth it. They drove in comfortable silence the rest of the way home. When they pulled into their parking spot, neither moved to get out immediately. Marcus, there's something I need to tell you, Claire said. I got a call from Judge Richardson yesterday. The foundation wants to create a new program specifically for students like you, kids who want to pursue law and social justice. They're calling it the Marcus Thompson Fellowship. Marcus's eyes widened. They're naming it after me? They want to create a pipeline from middle school through law school for students from underserved communities who show promise and passion for justice. You'd be the first fellow, of course, but you'd also help select future fellows and mentor them along the way. But I'm only 14. I haven't even done anything yet. Baby, you've done more in 5 years than most people do in a lifetime. You've proven that age doesn't determine impact, that circumstances don't determine character, and that one person really can make a difference. Marcus felt overwhelmed. When he walked into that courtroom 5 years ago, all he wanted was to save his mother. He never imagined it would lead to this, to a life dedicated to helping others, to opportunities he had never dreamed possible, to becoming someone who could inspire and create change. I'll do it, he said finally, but only if you help me. You're the one who taught me everything that matters. You should be part of this too. Claire smiled. Deal. Now let's get inside. You have homework, and I have an early shift tomorrow. As they walked into their apartment building, Marcus looked back at the city skyline, lit up against the night sky. Somewhere out there was another family struggling with impossible choices. There was another child who felt powerless against a system too big to fight. There was another mother working herself to exhaustion trying to provide a better life for her children. But now, there was also hope. There was a network of support. There was proof that the system could change, that justice could prevail, that courage and determination could overcome even the longest odds. Marcus thought about his father, the man he barely remembered but whose legacy of believing in justice and fighting for what was right had shaped his entire life. He thought about Judge Richardson and his mother Eleanor, who had turned their own struggles into opportunities for others. He thought about Martin Webb, who had learned to see past his own pain to understand others' stories. He thought about Judge Thornton, who had the wisdom to listen to a 9-year-old when everyone else was laughing. Most of all, he thought about his mother, Claire Thompson, the strongest person he had ever known, who had worked 2 jobs and sacrificed everything so that he could have a chance at a better life. Everything he was, everything he hoped to become, started with her. As they entered their apartment, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air, Marcus made a silent promise. He would honor every person who had helped them by helping others in return. He would use every opportunity, every privilege, every advantage to create opportunities for those who came after him. The courtroom had laughed at a 9-year-old boy once, but they weren't laughing anymore. They were listening, they were learning, they were changing. And Marcus Thompson, now 14 and just beginning to understand the full scope of his potential, knew that his real work was only just beginning. The cases he had helped with, the families he had supported, the program he was about to start, these were just the foundation. Ahead of him lay high school, college, law school, and eventually a career fighting for justice. But he wasn't daunted by the long road ahead. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that change doesn't happen all at once. It happens one case at a time, one family at a time, one brave stand at a time. He had been 9 years old when he learned that lesson. Now he was ready to teach it to others. The boy who had walked into a courtroom with a borrowed briefcase and desperate courage had become a young man with purpose, opportunity, and an unshakable belief that justice was worth fighting for. And somewhere in heaven, Jerome Thompson, the paralegal who had believed in the power of law to protect the vulnerable, looked down at his son and smiled. The story that began with a courtroom's laughter ended with a legacy of hope. And that, Marcus knew, was the most surprising outcome of all. Marcus's story reminds us that it's never too late to stand up for what's right, and we're never too small to make a difference. His courage at just 9 years old changed not only his family's destiny, but touched the lives of dozens of others who found themselves in similar struggles. If this story moved you, think about someone in your life who might need to hear it. A grandchild facing challenges, a friend going through hard times, or a young person who needs to know that their voice matters. Share Marcus's story with them. Let it be a reminder that justice, courage, and love can overcome even the most impossible odds. And remember, every person who fights for what's right, no matter their age or circumstances, plants seeds of hope that will bloom for generations to come. What will your legacy be? Thank you for taking this journey with Marcus and Claire. May their story inspire you to believe that change is always possible when we have the courage to stand up and fight for it.